Could Earth ever become one single country? Don't rush to say, no way. Think about it. 2,000 years ago, could anyone have imagined Europe one day creating something like the European Union? 100 years ago, could anyone have imagined a person sitting on a toilet, video chatting in real time with someone on the other side of the planet? The weirdest thing about human history is this. What looks like science fiction today might become a breaking news notification tomorrow. And throughout history, there really have been a few extremely ambitious people who almost pushed the idea of uniting the world into the final round. The first contestant is Alexander the Great. In 334 BC, this young Macedonian guy in his early 20s led his army eastward and conquered about 5 million square kilometers of land in just 10 years. From Greece to Egypt, from Persia all the way to the Indus Valley. If this happened in a strategy game, the system would probably pop up and ask, "Are you sure you're not cheating?" And he still wasn't planning to stop. He originally wanted to keep expanding into places like Arabia, but then he suddenly died at the age of 33. After that, his massive empire was quickly divided among his generals and eventually split apart. So, why did he fail? Because he couldn't solve one core problem, the cost of ruling. Back then, there were no planes, no internet, no satellite phones, not even a delivery guy on a scooter. If the capital sent an order to the borderlands, it could take months to arrive. If a rebellion happened on the frontier, by the time the news got back, the king might still be drinking at a banquet. And by the time he finally found out, the rebels might have already designed their new flag. The second contestant is Genghis Khan, and the Mongol Empire that came after him. At its peak, the Mongol Empire covered about 24 million square kilometers, a huge share of the world's land. What does that mean? Basically, it was like accidentally dragging your mouse across the map and coloring half of Eurasia the same color. But then came the problem. How do you actually govern a place that huge? In the end, they had to divide it into different regions. The Yuan dynasty ruled China, the Golden Horde ruled parts of Russia, the Ilkhanate ruled Persia, and the Chagatai Khanate ruled Central Asia. It sounded like one giant multinational corporation, except every branch office thought it was the real headquarters. Before long, each Khanate started doing its own thing. Different languages, different cultures, different interests. Militarily, the Mongols conquered huge territories, but culturally, they never truly fused everything together. So the problem with the Mongol Empire was this: it achieved military unity, but not identity unity. The third contestant is the British Empire. At its peak, the British Empire was called the empire on which the sun never sets, and it controlled around a quarter of the world's land and population. That sounds insane. But it was not a unified country in the true sense. It was a colonial empire. Did people in India, Africa, Australia, and Canada all genuinely feel like they were simply British? Not really. A lot of the time, it was more like everyone had been forced into the same company group chat. The boss was in London, the employees were everywhere, the benefits were different, the pay was different, and the voting power was definitely not equal. After World War II, the colonial system collapsed quickly, and many regions became independent. Its failure was obvious, ruled by pressure, with no real shared identity. So, do you see the pattern? Military conquest is easy. Long-term rule is hard. Unifying land is easy. Unifying hearts is the nightmare mode. A country is not just a map painted in one color. If that were all it took, world history would basically be a coloring book. So, do we have anything today that comes close to a world government? Yes, but they are all unfinished prototypes. Take the United Nations. The UN is kind of like a neighborhood committee for the planet. When the neighbors start fighting, it can come out and say, "Hey, calm down, let's talk." But it cannot enforce everything like a real world government, especially because the 5 permanent members of the Security Council have veto power. If one major power says no, many things get stuck. That design alone tells you something important. Everyone is willing to sit down for meetings, but nobody really wants to hand over the steering wheel. Then there's the World Trade Organization. It's like the economic version of the UN, designed to coordinate global trade rules. But in reality, the moment countries feel like they are losing out, they start arguing. The United States adds restrictions, China gets targeted, and the European Union has its own calculations too. Everyone says they love free trade, but everyone also keeps a calculator hidden under the table. The International Olympic Committee might be one of the most successful global organizations. Every few years, athletes from all over the world gather together, and the atmosphere looks very united. But look closely. They still raise their own national flags. They still play their own national anthems. People hug each other at the stadium, then go home and continue arguing like usual. And language is an even bigger problem. There are more than 7,000 languages in the world today. English is one of the strongest global languages, but it is still not everyone's native language. Trying to make all humans use one language? That's like trying to make everyone agree on one flavor. Some people love sweet food. Some people love spicy food. Some people think cilantro is a gift from heaven, and some people think it tastes like soap. Religion is just as complicated. Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, and countless local belief systems. For many people, religion is not just belief. It is identity, history, family, and a way of life. You want everyone to suddenly say, "Great, from today onward, we are all exactly the same." That is harder than getting cats and dogs to run a startup together. Currency is another problem. The US dollar is still one of the most important reserve currencies in the world, but the euro, the yuan, the yen, and other currencies all have their own roles. If you create one world currency, who issues it? Who manages it? Who takes the blame when inflation hits? You can't have the Earth Central Bank posting an apology every time global prices go up. Law is even messier. Some countries have the death penalty. Some don't. Some places have completely different legal standards on issues like adultery, abortion, religion, speech, and privacy. The same action might be legal in country A and illegal in country B. So after unification, whose rules do we follow? But the deepest gap of all is wealth inequality. Take a rich country like Switzerland and compare it with one of the poorest countries in the world. The income gap can be enormous. Now imagine Swiss citizens and people from Burundi suddenly becoming part of the same country, with the same standards for taxes, welfare, healthcare, and education. Problems would appear instantly. Rich countries would ask, why should we keep paying for everyone? Poor countries would ask, if we are all one country now, why are we still so poor? At that point, the meeting room lights might not even be on yet, and people would already be slamming the table. But don't get too depressed. Because there are four major forces quietly pushing humanity toward deeper global integration. The first force is global problems. Climate change does not respect borders. Carbon emissions do not stop at customs to get a stamp. A pandemic virus does not show up with a passport and say, "Hello, may I enter your country?" These problems are extremely hard for one country to solve alone. They require global cooperation. The second force is the explosion of technology. The internet allows information to flow across borders. Space technology lets us look at Earth from above. And when you look at Earth from space, you realize something funny. National borders are just lines humans drew on maps. The planet itself does not come with borders printed on it. Artificial intelligence may also force humanity to create global rules. Because if AI gets out of control, it will not politely attack only one country. It will not say, "Sorry, I only serve local users." The third force is economic integration. The phone in your hand may contain parts from a dozen or even 20 different countries. Chips, screens, batteries, cameras, software, assembly. Behind one device is an entire global supply chain. Companies like Apple, Toyota, and Samsung are becoming harder to define by nationality. They are more like supernodes in the global economy. Add digital currency, cross-border payments, and global e-commerce into the mix, and the traditional national currency system may be rewritten in the future. The fourth force is external threat. This is probably the most ridiculous, but also the most effective path to unity. If tomorrow we discover that a giant asteroid was heading straight toward Earth, would humanity suddenly become more united? Probably. Because at that point, people would not be Americans, Chinese, French, or Indians first. Everyone would just be players on the same Earth server. And if aliens actually arrived, then it would be even more obvious. No matter how much humans argue with each other, once alien warships show up in orbit, humanity might suddenly learn the meaning of let's deal with our internal drama later. So the most realistic path may not be one country conquering the entire world. It may be humanity getting forced together by shared crises. First, global institutions are created. Then countries gradually give up parts of their sovereignty. Only after that could true unification become possible. Science fiction writers have already designed a bunch of models for us. The first is the Star Trek model. After huge disasters, humanity learns its lesson and creates the united Earth. There is no war, no poverty, and eventually, not even money in the traditional sense. People get what they need. It sounds beautiful, but the key condition is that they have replicators. Material resources are extremely abundant. You want a steak, the machine makes one. You want a phone, the machine prints one. Once the resource problem is solved, humanity finally earns the right to say, okay, everybody stop fighting over stuff. The second is the foundation model. Using psychohistory, mathematics is used to predict the development of civilization and rebuild a new galactic order. It sounds very advanced. Almost like society's problems have finally been handed over to the math teacher. But the problem is, empires still decline. Because no matter how smart the system is, human nature is almost impossible to predict perfectly. The third is the three-body problem model. Facing the threat of an alien civilization, Earth builds a planetary defense system. But even when aliens are basically on the way, humans are still scheming against each other. What does that tell us? External pressure can push humans toward unity, but it cannot magically delete human selfishness. All these science fiction models have one thing in common. Either they require a massive external threat or a major technological revolution. Otherwise, human nature does not suddenly get a software update. At the end of the day, the biggest obstacle to uniting Earth is still human nature. The first obstacle is tribal instinct. Humans naturally divide the world into us and them. In psychology experiments, even when people are randomly divided into groups and given different labels or symbols, they can quickly develop hostility. Just look at football fans. People can argue like crazy over different teams. Now imagine adding nations, ethnic groups, religion, and centuries of historical resentment into the mix. Humans are sometimes incredibly smart. We build rockets, chips, and artificial intelligence. But sometimes, we are basically ancient tribespeople wearing business suits. The second obstacle is vested interest. Why would rich countries share their wealth with poor countries? Why would resource-rich countries give up their advantages? Why would oil-producing countries easily give up oil profits? And arms dealers would be in a very awkward position. If the world became peaceful, who would they sell weapons to? Are they supposed to start selling air fryers? The third obstacle is cultural pride. Americans often believe their system is the best. Chinese people are proud of having one of the world's oldest continuous civilizations. Indians, Japanese, French, Russians, and many others also have strong national pride. Everyone thinks they make sense. And in a real global meeting, every country might feel like it is the main character, while everyone else is just background cast. The most ironic part is that experiments have already shown how easily humans split into groups. In the Robbers Cave experiment in 1954, a group of boys was divided into two teams with different names and identities. Before long, the two groups became hostile toward each other. And those were just kids. No oil, no religion, no border disputes, no centuries of historical trauma. They still managed to fight. So, if you want all of humanity to fully unite, that is basically as hard as getting an entire classroom to agree on whether pineapple belongs on pizza. Now let's go full imagination mode. Suppose tomorrow humanity really did unite. What would the new country be called? The Earth Federation? The Human Republic? The Gaia Commonwealth? Or maybe something more direct, like Earth Server 1? Where would the capital be? Option 1, a small island in the Pacific near the international date line. The reason is simple. Neutral time zone. Nobody gets to complain about bias. Option 2, a space station. Absolutely neutral. It belongs to no country. The only problem is the commute would be expensive. If you are late to a meeting, you can't blame traffic. You have to blame the rocket launch schedule. A more realistic plan might be a rotating capital. This year in Geneva, next year in Singapore, the year after that in Nairobi. What about the official language? Option A, English. The easiest choice, but many countries would be unhappy. Option B, Esperanto. Very idealistic, but not many people actually use it. Option C, many languages at the same time, supported by real-time AI translation. That might be the most realistic. In a future global parliament, representatives could speak their own languages, and AI would handle the translation. Of course, if the AI mistranslates something, a diplomatic crisis could go from "please have some tea" to "prepare for war." What about the political system? It would probably be a federation, like a much larger version of the American system. But problems would appear immediately. China and India have the largest populations. So if voting power is based on population, would they dominate? What about small island nations? If every country gets one vote, then large countries would say, that is unfair. So maybe voting power would be weighted by population, GDP, land area, and contribution. Sounds scientific. But calculating it might be more painful than the final question on a math exam. Taxes would be even worse. Rich regions would subsidize poor regions. But how much? Poor regions would demand more development resources. Rich regions would demand more political influence. The whole thing could turn into the world's biggest family inheritance argument. How would the law be unified? Something legal in one country may be illegal in another. Marriage, religion, speech, guns, the death penalty, privacy, data security, every single one could trigger a 3-day argument. What about the military? Do all national armies disband and become one Earth army? Who commands it? Who controls the nuclear weapons? Who pays for the military budget? And what about historical hatred? Can the historical issues between Japan and South Korea simply vanish? Can the conflict between Israel and Palestine be wiped away? Can the tensions between India and Pakistan just disappear? Obviously not. History is not phone storage. You can't just tap clear cache and make it disappear. If Earth really does move toward unification, the most likely path would happen in stages. The first stage from now to 2050 would be functional integration. Not a world government right away, but solving shared problems first. Climate change, global public health, internet governance, AI regulation, transnational crime, and financial risk. Humanity would first create rules in these areas and slowly get used to the idea of managing global issues together. The second stage from 2050 to 2100 would be deeper regional alliances. The European Union might continue evolving. Asia, the Americas, and Africa might also develop stronger regional organizations. Then these regional blocs could build an early version of a global parliament, along with limited digital currencies and cross-border governance systems. The third stage, from 2100 to 2200, would involve partial transfer of sovereignty. Countries might gradually give up some control over currency issuance, defense coordination, global taxation, and environmental governance. This step would be extremely difficult. Because for a country, sovereignty is like the steering wheel. If you ask it to hand that over, its first reaction is to lock the car doors. Only in the fourth stage might a true Earth Federation appear. There could be a global capital, parts of a unified legal system, and an Earth citizenship that gradually becomes more important than nationality. But this would require several conditions. First, technological breakthroughs. Energy, food, healthcare, and resource distribution problems must be greatly reduced. Humanity cannot fight over dinner while talking about world unity. Second, an education revolution. Several generations would need to grow up with a real sense of Earth citizenship. Not just I am from this country, but also I am from this planet. Third, a crisis catalyst. Without a major crisis, humans usually do not change on their own. That is very human. We do not admit the kitchen is on fire until the flames are already touching our eyebrows. So in this process, what would China think? Chinese culture does have the traditional ideal of great unity under heaven, or Qiangshi Daidong. But that idea is more about order and a shared civilization community. It does not necessarily mean a modern global superstate. From a practical angle, China has advantages but also concerns. Its advantages are population size, economic scale, long civilizational continuity, and strong organizational capacity. Its concerns are also obvious. Sovereignty is a very sensitive issue. Its cultural traditions are distinctive. Its development path is not exactly the same as the West. So China's most likely position would not be to support sudden, radical unification. It would more likely support gradual integration, while opposing forced unification. It would support unity with diversity, not one single model for everyone. In other words, China might say, "We can cooperate. We can build rules together. We can solve global problems together. But do not start by saying everyone must become the same system, the same culture, and the same way of life." In fact, Chinese history itself is like a giant experiment in unification. The Qin dynasty unified the warring states and pushed standardization in roads, writing, weights, and measurements. But real cultural integration did not happen overnight. It took a very long historical process. And today, China has 56 ethnic groups living within one national framework. That experience may become one reference point for future global integration. Of course, Earth is far more complicated than China. There are more languages, more religions, more historical conflicts, and much bigger wealth gaps. So Earth unification is not impossible. But it is definitely not something that can be finished tomorrow by holding a meeting and asking everyone to raise their hands. It is more like a civilization-level project that could take hundreds of years. It may require technology to push it forward, crises to force it forward, and generations of humans to slowly change how they think. In the end, we may not suddenly wake up with a world government. Instead, we may first get more global rules, more shared institutions, and more cross-border identities. Then one day, humans may look back and realize that without noticing it, we have already moved toward a world that acts more like one whole. So, could Earth ever become one single country? The answer is possible. But not because of one emperor, one empire, or one army conquering the planet. It would happen through shared crises, technological progress, economic integration, and a slow expansion of human identity. But judging by humanity's current personality, unless aliens literally park a spaceship next to the moon, we may still need to argue for a few more centuries. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Making videos is not easy, so if you enjoyed this one, please like, subscribe, and support the channel. See you next time.